11 seconds remaining. One last rush perhaps for the Flyers. Giroux to Hartnell. To Giroux. Giroux holds all the way across. Parker scores! 2.1 seconds remaining, and the Flyers are on top.
TheFourthPeriod.com presents the O&B Puckcast, episode number 84, as the Flyers are 3 games into the quarterfinal series with the Montreal Canadiens, and we got a lot to talk about, and we have a special guest with us who I think you're going to enjoy. I'm your host, Isaiah, and I'm here with my partners, Chef B.
How you doing?
And the great Dan Silver.
What's going on?
Not much, man. We're in a dogfight here. Let's, without any further ado, introduce our distinguished guest, who is the lead correspondent with the AHL Report, which is part of Rocket Sports Media. Returning guest, Amy Johnson.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It was the first time that I was on. It was a great conversation with you guys, and I'm certainly excited to talk about this series that we're in the middle of now.
Terrific. Yeah, it's a great episode. Maybe you check that out. Some of that stuff's still relevant with some of the prospects and players that you cover, because you also cover the Phantoms and the Laval Rocket as well.
That's correct. We at the AHL Report, we actually focus on the Montreal Canadiens and the Philadelphia Flyers prospects at the AHL, ECHL level, and then in NCAA and junior hockey and so forth. So yeah, lots of prospect coverage over there.
Well, terrific. Well, let's dive in. I think, in fairness, we want to go back and review the first 3 games, but we have to talk about last night. The Flyers with a bounce-back performance, but there was a pretty 50-50 game, and it's a game that still either team could have won. But you got to give the Flyers credit, Amy, because it was a bounce-back effort, and they did a lot of things in Game 3 that they looked like they were totally incapable of doing in the previous one.
I agree with you. I think it set the tone for how they can approach the rest of this series for sure. I think, the Flyers coming into this series, no pun intended, but they skated through the round robin in the exhibition pretty darn easily. They didn't face a whole lot of pushback in any of those games, and they faced a bunch of pretty big teams and big names. And so I think, I don't want to say that they underestimated Montreal, but Montreal certainly coming into this was the one team that no one expected to do anything. They were definitely the underdog, took everyone by surprise when they cleaned house with the Pittsburgh Penguins the way that they did, held, there was a game where they held Sidney Crosby without a shot. It was just, it was a complete drubbing. And so then it came to this series, and everyone thought, okay, well, now the Flyers are going to kind of teach them a lesson here. And it showed in the first game that didn't completely happen, because there was a period, that second period in the first game, that the Flyers were completely outplayed by the Canadiens. And I think that took everyone off guard a little bit. And then for them to come out in the second game and just be completely dominated from start to finish by Montreal, I think that really woke things up for the Flyers to say, okay, our game plan that has got us to this point is obviously not going to continue to help us be successful. We've got to play the game that Montreal is playing and give them a taste of their own medicine. And you could see that that's what they were starting to be able to do last night. There were some iffy moments, and that 1-goal lead seemed to be a little shaky at times, but they did start to get that kind of push back that they needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott Lawton was vying for double agent status, I think.
I think so.
So,
He owes Carter Hart a couple of steak dinners, I think.
yeah, at least a couple brews. Dan, just wanted to get your input with Amy and about some of your observations.
Yeah, I mean, she did a really good job of kind of recapping what the Canadians people thought they were heading into the playoffs and kind of how that changed after the Penguins series, and then sort of what happened in the Flyers series. And the Flyers game 3 was a game that a lot of Flyers fans were extremely nervous about because, like Amy said, this is a team that kind of carved through the round robin like a Ginzu knife against 3 of the best teams in the NHL. And then they haven't really looked like the same team offensively against the Canadians. And Game 2 was the biggest defeat that any NHL team has suffered since the return to play. So, there were a lot of Flyers fans who were kind of, after that game, kind of saying, listen, we shouldn't overreact. Well, I'll tell you what, no, it was justified because they got absolutely destroyed in every facet of the game in Game 2. And so I think the question was, all right, how is this team going to rebound? I mean, this is a Flyers team that since January has not lost back-to-back games, which is absolutely incredible. So could they do the same thing in the playoffs? And look, they put together a 60-minute effort against the Canadians in Game 3. It was not pretty on either side at times, but maybe that's just the way that you're going to have to play against the Canadians. And, some of the things I've been thinking about are how good Shea Weber looks. He reminds me of how Chris Pronger looked back in his prime. He just dominates out there. When he's out there, I'm thinking to myself, we're not going to score because he's manhandling guys like Sean Couturier at times. And then Jeff Petry's been great on the second pairing. And Carey Price is obviously terrific. Plus you've got Kotkaniemi and Suzuki, who have been fantastic. So maybe we just need to accept that this Canadians team is a lot better than their record indicates and that their fact that they're a 12 seed indicates. And this series is just going to be kind of ugly. I think there were some good indicators in Game 3 for the Flyers with how Giroux and Voracek and Couturier looked. You could see maybe those guys were starting to find their game a little bit, and which is going to be pivotal for this team, not just if they want to beat the Canadians, but as they move on to future series. But what this series has proven so far is that we can't think past this series. It's going to be a game at a time, and it's going to be, these games are going to be hard fought. And if they're not hard fought, it might be the Canadians blowing the doors off of us again. So, I think this is going to be a nerve-wracking series, and we've got to understand that the Canadians are a much better team than anyone thought.
Yeah, we can definitely see that. And Amy, what are the Canadians beyond the surface opinion or evaluation of them as a fast pressure team, a very solid defensive structure? But we're getting some performances, like Dan pointed out, from Shea Weber, who really hadn't been that effective in the last maybe a couple seasons, which were injury riddled, and Carey Price returning to the form that gave him his reputation, and some of these other defensemen. And we're seeing guys like Nick Suzuki and particularly Kotkaniemi, who is just an ascendant player. Like, how is this all coming together from the Montreal perspective?
Well, it's really interesting. It's a great question because, as Dan said, I mean, coming into this, to be fair, the Canadians have no business in the return to play. They're here only because of how the return to play structure was set up. Because when the pause happened back in March, I think the statistics were something like they had a 0.1% chance of making the playoffs. I mean, essentially they weren't making the playoffs, and that was apparent at the trade deadline. Marc Bergevin sold off a lot. I mean, Nate Thompson gone. You had all sorts of guys leave the Kovalchuk left. All sorts of the powerhouse kinds of guys that you would expect to step up in the playoffs. Marc Bergevin sold all that off. It was obvious that they weren't thinking that they were going to make the postseason. So now you're left with what was left, and now they're in the playoffs, and you're seeing this surgence of younger players coupled with veteran players who are stepping up the way that they are expected to. You mentioned Carey Price, of course. Carey Price, and it was widely known if they were going to do anything in this return to play, Carey Price had to be what he is exalted to be, and he has done that. He has stepped up. He has stolen some games for them, and just been stellar and quietly confident back there in between the pipes. Shea Weber is a great one to point out. Shea Weber, yes, Shea Weber in hockey years is getting up there a little bit, and has had some injury issues and so on and so forth. And some fans start to grumble that, Shea Weber just is past his prime and, put him in the stables and that kind of thing. Well, Shea Weber is showing everyone that he's not done yet at all. Anyone who blocks one of his shots, especially if he gets all of it, will tell you that Shea Weber's not done, and he's using his body the way that he should be, and is just a complete irritant to anyone who has the puck. And he's been a big difference maker. You mentioned Petrie as well. Sherratt has been, with Weber, has been one of the biggest irritators on the back end. You could see particularly in game 2 and again last night, there's a lot of players. Konechny's not the only one that's had about enough of Sherratt. He's getting under the skin of a lot of the Flyers players, and it's because he's just constantly in their face. On the youth side, because Marc Bergevin sold everything off at the trade deadline, now it's okay, well, the young guys have to fill those holes if we're going to do anything. Suzuki has been with the team for the year, and he's had his struggles. He's had his good moments and his bad moments, and that's both in the regular season and now in the playoffs. He has played in the qualifying round against Pittsburgh. He was defensively better than I've seen him, so he's obviously been working on some things, but there's times where his youth shows through. The big standout for me, yes, has been Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Kotkaniemi had a really rough sophomore season. He was this young phenom that came in his rookie year and swept Montreal fans off their feet. And then obviously, ran into those young player under the microscope of the Montreal media and fans and so forth, and had his struggles this year and ended up getting demoted and sent down to the AHL. He got sent down to Laval very unceremoniously. It was, I think, a difficult pill for him to swallow at first. And then he embraced it and really worked on small details in his game, and he was lighting up the AHL for Laval down the stretch there. And then, oddly enough, he went out with a spleen injury, and there wasn't a lot said about it, but he ended up going back home, went back to Finland, and had been rehabbing, and we don't actually know for sure what happened to his spleen, but he went home and got better, and then suddenly just came back and is full of confidence. He put some size on. He's obviously been hitting the gym. His dad used to be his coach when he was playing in Finland, so his dad at home was putting him through the paces this summer, and he's put on a lot of muscle. He's getting more comfortable in his frame. You can see the way he finishes his checks. There's a bit more maturity to it. He knows where his center of gravity is to put his shoulder in and finish checks, and he's not afraid to get into the dirty areas anymore. And he certainly has a shot, and he's not afraid to use it. So he's really the young guys are really coming up, and now you see, Dale Weiss has been a healthy scratch now for the last couple of games. I'm waiting to see. We saw in last night's game, Jake Evans drew in. He's another kind of hot prospect for the Canadians. Who he didn't play much ice time last night, but if he continues to stay in the lineup, he's another one that can be very physical and has a lot of offensive prowess. I'm also waiting to see if they're going to draw Ryan Poehling in. Ryan Poehling is another one of their top prospects who is currently not played yet. He's taken warm-ups a few times, and you never know. You might see him draw in perhaps in place of Alex Belzile here sometime soon.
Yeah, but Kotkaniemi has a projectable frame, and you could see it's all coming together. His wrist shot reminds me a little bit, don't want to get carried away, but has a little bit of a technique like Austin Matthews, the way he hides it. And, the spleen injury, maybe you read about Peter Forsberg famously had a spleen injury, and he was motivated by that. But, Chef, any comments or questions that you have?
Yeah. Well, when we had talked about the break, so to speak, is, for months plus, that it was basically getting an off season, an extra free time, especially for the youngsters to grow. We've seen that with the Flyers, but could this contribute to Montreal's success with their younger players like Suzuki and Kakamemi?
Absolutely. Giving them a chance to step away from the game and just focus on, staying in the doing what they can, whether if they could get to a gym or had a home gym, and even just that confidence bump. And guys for the Flyers like Connor Bunnaman and those kinds of guys would also, even Zamula being there, the confidence bump that you get just in being chosen to be part of the Black Aces squad is going to give you that additional drive and passion and motivation to really want to make a difference. And so you saw that in training camps. The young guys were not there to play around. They were there to make a difference. And I really think that for the Canadians, it's been the same thing. I think Kotkaniemi and Suzuki definitely made the most of their quote unquote off season, their paused off season. I believe Ryan Poehling, if he gets a chance, will show the same thing, as well as Cale Fleury on the back end. Cale Fleury is quite a young defender, and I haven't exactly been impressed with Xavier Ouellet's performance on the third pairing. Would love to see if perhaps Cale Fleury slots in there at some point.
Amy, one of the things that also comes to mind in this series is this kind of strange, dueling, motivational, I don't know how I'd put it, two sides of the same coin. Right before Game 2, Claude Julien, the Montreal coach, has to go and get a stent procedure to prevent an occlusion or obstruction in his coronary artery, and he's out indefinitely. Is there any word that he possibly could come back later, or they're just not saying at this time?
At this point in time, they're not giving a return, any estimates on return. I would imagine with the emergency status that it happened overnight and immediately needed to have a stent put in the next day, I would imagine that even if he physically heals up, probably don't want the stress on his heart to be traveling again and quarantining again and then having to run day-to-day operations. So I would expect that at least for the next little while, we'll continue to see Kirk Muller behind the bench, and for sure that provided plenty of extra motivation in that dressing room for sure. Just like Oscar Lindblom practicing with the team yesterday did for the Flyers.
Yeah, that's a phenomenon. I thought it was very interesting, just really unique. You say, oh yeah, well, your coach had a heart attack. Where our guy's coming back from cancer that usually takes, almost 3/4 of the people that come down with it, Dan. I mean, that was really something to see Oscar out there getting those stick taps. And I think, the Flyers came out like almost as much of a house of fire as the Canadians had before that with the news about Julien.
Yeah, that was, seeing him in the middle of the circle leading the cheers and leading stretches and watching the guys respond. It's almost, I think Alain Vigneault said that it was bringing a tear to the coach's eyes when that was going on. And it is incredible what he's been through, and the fact that he's already back out on the ice, hoping to maybe play if this team goes a few more rounds. It was emotional, and you could see, it's always hard to tell how much these things actually impact a team's performance and how they come out. I feel like the Flyers were going to come out hard in Game 3 no matter what. Certainly having Lindblom there that day had to add a little bit of an additional emotional, jolt. But the other funny thing about that was not funny, but Travis Konechny, no one knew his status, and so everyone's watching that video on the Flyers website of Oscar Lindblom in the middle of the circle, and now people are also looking around like, hey, is Travis Konechny out there? And then you see Konechny comes in late in that video and starts slamming his ice on the ice, slamming his stick on the ice, and it's looks like Konechny's okay. So It's funny how in the in the age of the playoffs and we get zero information, we're kind of trying to mine it any way we can. But yeah, I mean, I think that Lindblom helped give them a little bit of a boost emotionally, and it's certainly not going to hurt. I just it's always hard to tell how much that actually impacts a team's performance or not. But I mean, it doesn't hurt, and if this team can go a couple rounds and he comes back, I mean, watch out. That's going to be something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we know a couple factors that were brought up, Amy, do not seem to be ones of major consequence. The shape of the ice, how that's playing, nor Alain Vigneault calling out Kirk Muller for bringing out the top power play unit late in the 5-0 shellacking game 2. I think it was more or less telling the team, look, you should be embarrassed, and you just use Kirk Muller as a conduit, if you will.
Yes, I do believe he was reacting from a sheer emotional standpoint. AV is very quick to come to the microphone after a game. And so I don't know that there's a lot of cooling off period between the final horn and when he comes to the microphone. It's interesting because the Canadians, AV comes out first and then his players come out after that. The Canadians do it exactly the opposite. Players come out and then either Julian or now Kirk Muller is the last to speak, which is handy for me because I can catch both coaches in post-game coverage. But it's, so Vigneault, I think, yes, was speaking from a place of truly, he used the word embarrassed I half a dozen times. And I think he truly was. I think he was shocked at what had happened. I do know that it did not ring well on the Montreal fan side. I know that it drew quite a lot of ire on social media, particularly more to the fact that it was Kirk Muller's first NHL playoff game as a head coach. And so fans were pretty protective of Muller in that aspect, and I can understand that. And so it was kind of a, depending on who you spoke to, was more of how that was received. And interesting to note that in his pre-game media availability yesterday, Alain Vigneault brought it up. So, for me, I was like, okay, maybe it was just he was feeling the emotion after the game, and that was 2 days ago, and we're moving on now. But one of my colleagues who speaks for, I unfortunately don't speak French, so half of Canadians coverage I don't always understand questions and answers. But one of the French questions that he took yesterday before the game, someone asked him a question and Vigneault brought it up again in French. And so then it's like, okay, well, maybe we don't need to keep hammering this at this point. But so it was still on his mind as of yesterday before the game.
That's interesting. You wonder if he might be playing a little bit of a mind game with Muller.
It's possible. It's possible. It is the playoffs.
yeah, that's for sure.
And as for the shape of the ice, there was I want to say if it was after game 1 or game 2, I want to say that almost every single reporter on the media availability that night after the game and the next day in the availability after practice asked every single player, oh, is the ice not? And every single player, including Giroux, there had to have been at least 6 players who all said, the ice isn't an issue. Honestly, it was better than it was during the round robin. So the ice doesn't seem to, at least the players are not saying that the ice is a factor.
Right. Yeah. Well, they said the ice would get better as time goes on, so they know how those things work. That's for sure. But I just wanted to harp on some themes that are recurring throughout the playoffs so far, particularly the power play. Chef, it seems like the Flyers, if you listen to AV today, the Flyers aren't really up for so much personnel changes, but maybe some schematic ones.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at this point, if you watch a game, I don't know what Giroux was thinking, or even Voracek. I mean, before he even attempted that cross ice pass, they were already moving to block out the lane. They blocked that lane like 4 or 5 times on all the power plays. I mean, at this point, I think I could block that lane on their power play, in a pair of roller skates with, in wet sand. So, yes, they're going to have to maybe, like you said, not reformulate. I would split up Jake and Giroux at this point. I think they're just one bad decision on a power play is enough on a power play unit for my taste. And at this point, I just think that they need to be separated. Bring somebody up. Bring Abe Kubel up. I mean, he has a decent wrist shot. Saw that halfway through the season. I think I can't believe I'm going to say this, but Haig, just for the simple fact that his shot is heavy and they're low and they get through. So I would like to see more shots, low shots, maybe some wristers getting through on that power play, because by the time they wind up, it's either getting blocked, the lane's gone, or Carey Price, let's face it, he saw almost everything.
Yeah, and Dan, I was going to run it. We're going to panel this one because I suggested that maybe Travis Sanheim. It's tough when you're number one defenseman who's been fairly successful. Ivan Provorov at the top of the key there with the power play, but they need some more dynamism. Someone who can see lanes, passing lanes, and shooting lanes. And I think Travis Sanheim could be a better fit. But what do you say?
The power play is a tricky situation. I think that all things considered, I'm just going to talk through this. All things considered, I think that, Shane Gostisbehere is probably the most dynamic option for the Flyers' top power play. However, it's very clear right now that they're a better team when our third pairing is Braun and Haig, which means that Ghost is not in the lineup. So you can't have Ghost on the power play because the team's not playing as well with him in the lineup even strength. So now you look at, Ivan Provorov's the number one power play guy. Ivan Provorov is in my mind, one of the best young defensemen in the league. He's probably a top 15 defenseman. What makes him so good is that he's an absolute warrior. He doesn't miss games. He can play 26, 27 minutes a game. He can also chip in offensively. He led the NHL in goals by defenseman a couple years ago. However, he is not the dynamic type of offensive defenseman like a Quinn Hughes or a Cale Makar or Brett Burns used to be, or John Carlson. He may develop into that guy, but he's not that kind of guy. He's above average on the power play right now. He's serviceable on a number one unit. But the Flyers, it'd be nice if they could get a little bit more from that spot. Travis Sanheim, I think, has a ton of upside on the power play because in my mind, he's the best passer of all the Flyers defensemen. He's the best lateral skater of all the Flyers defensemen, so he can walk the blue line. But he doesn't have a bomb of a shot on the point. So it's almost like if you were going to use Sanheim, you would also want to use Ivan Provorov, who has gotten very adept at getting shots through from the point. It's kind of a long way of saying that there's no ideal option for the Flyers right now on that top unit power play. And maybe ultimately Cam York is the guy. I mean, Cam York's got a lot of Torrey Krug in him, and he's going back to Michigan for another year. So maybe a couple years down the road, Cam York is the number one power play guy for the Flyers among the D unit. But he's not here yet. So, it's I think for now you kind of have to keep Provorov in that spot. And to be fair, he's not the biggest issue on this power play. Zone entries are a big issue. Now, he's not very good at zone entries on the power play. Jake Voracek's the best Flyers forward at zone entries on the power play. I think they've got to get him the puck more, let him carry it in. When they set up on the power play against the Canadiens in Game 3, they actually had some decent chances. They almost scored a couple times. They had a couple, passes through the crease that just weren't connected on. When they set it up, they're okay, but they just weren't able to set it up. And so I think that's the biggest thing for them is the zone entries, and you got to get it to Voracek to do that. I think Couturier's okay at that, but the problem is that the D-man you've got is not great at power play zone entries.
Yeah, I agree with that. Amy, your thoughts?
Well, it's obviously is the thing I think that the Flyers really need to fix if they're not only going to get past the Canadiens, but if they're going to go deep into this playoff run. They can't continue suffering on the power play the way they have been, particularly when opponents like Montreal are going to give them 6 opportunities on it like they did last night. A 4-minute power play double minor and you get 2 shots is not ideal. So it is obviously something that needs to be fixed. I'm going to borrow an echo off of, we actually just recorded our weekly podcast earlier today, and we had a special guest on today who was talking just about this. Danny Briere joined us today, and he was talking to us about the power play, and I really had to agree with what he said about stop shooting from the perimeter. He said one of the big things that he thinks really needs to happen is they've got to, like Voracek's one ugly goal that went in last night, it was because Jake Voracek, granted that was even strength, but he got to the net. And on the power play, a little bit more of that needs to happen. Carey Price isn't going to let anything through from the perimeter for the most part. So I think in order to do that, you have to get set up faster. To get set up faster, you've got to win faceoffs. And there were a lot of times in the power play last night, they were losing draws. And so then they would kill 20 seconds trying to get, Montreal would clear the puck, get reset, cycle back in, and try to finally get set. And they're wasting too much time doing that instead of trying to get positioned and get in closer to Carey Price in the crease.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Some really good points by Danny.
Also, can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
A lot of those opportunities that Dan and just alluded to, they were only first time opportunities. I mean, there were a couple times where, like Amy said, the traffic in front of the net, it was a first time, and then there was nobody there. He saw everything, and it wasn't like he wasn't leaving rebounds to be had. There were some to be had. It's just players were out of position. Nobody parked. I think one of my biggest disappointments has been JVR. I mean, that used to be his bread and butter. He would be there, and I think to their credit, the defense, in particular Weber, and they cleared the porch, so to speak, and I think that's why we brought Haig back, and I'm hopefully that we'll get better results out of the same way they did.
Yeah, well, that all comes together. There's a lot of good points. You got to give the Habs credit for doing a good job physically, and I think the Flyers engaged physically last night, Amy, and it was within the structure instead of just running around and trying to hit people and compile hits that don't really help your team. In fact, might even hurt them. Because the Flyers had much better structure, played with more determination, speed, won more battles, they were able to unleash their own physical game. And I think that is, as much as anything, what put the Flyers in a better position to turn this series toward their favor.
Absolutely, and it's what they need to continue to do. Montreal is going to continue to forecheck very heavily, and you knew right off the bat, AV was going to go with a heavy game when he's starting his fourth line. As soon as you see that Nate Thompson or Michael Raffl are going to take the first shift of the game, you know where AV is going with that. And that's exactly what they needed to do. Raffl being able to come back healthy was impactful. He made a difference in his physical play. Philippe Myers does the same thing. We here at Rocket Sports, we have always been a Phil Myers fan, even before he was playing in the NHL, and he's doing exactly what he needs to be doing with his size. Travis Sanheim is another one who's not shy about using that physicality. But you're right. The key is that they're disciplined in it. I think a lot of opponents and a lot of fans for opponents always, they think of the Flyers as the Broad Street bullies and the guys that are undisciplined and just start fights for the heck of it and things of that nature. And this Flyers team isn't like that anymore. There's a lot more attention on speed and skill, and they use their physicality to their advantage, not just for brute force. And you could see throughout the game last night that as the game wore on, particularly in the third period, they started wearing the Canadians down physically, and that helped them to be able to keep them at bay in the third period and not let them get on the score sheet. So I think that's the key to continuing to be successful against Montreal, is they have to continue to wear them down.
Yeah, absolutely. And one constant throughout the series, even though he was pulled in game 2, Carter Hart really wasn't at fault. And last night's shutout was the youngest Flyer goaltender, with Carter Hart at 22 years and 3 days, breaking a 40-year-old record of Pete Peters going back to my time. And, Carter just looks unflappable, and it's almost like looking in a mirror, like a slightly miniature version of Carey Price. Their styles are so similar. And the one thing, though, is Carey Price is really almost getting Brodeur-like with his zone clears. And the Flyers have had to make some adjustments to, keep their forecheck or their dump-ins from being just completely, taken by the wayside with Carey Price getting out there and just, making almost like an exit pass. Absolutely. One thing Carey Price has always been well known for is his puck handling abilities, and he is not afraid to play the puck, and obviously isn't afraid to just take things into his own hands. And I think a little bit of what you're seeing with that, and it's interesting. He had one clearing pass last night that went practically all the way down the ice to Carter Hart untouched. And nobody really batted an eye at it because it's become so commonplace for Price to do that these days. I think part of that has really started to stem from the last couple of years that, frankly, the defense in front of Carey Price has not really been reliable. And I think that while he will never say it and admit it to the media, I think that he has gotten frustrated over the past couple of seasons of the lack of support in front of him as far as his blue liners. And so I think he knows he can play the puck very skillfully. He knows that he can handle the puck very well and not create dangerous situations with it. And so I think he has just come to, if he sees an opportunity, he's just going to take it. He's not going to think twice about it, and he's just going to kind of get the job done himself. So, yeah, it's something that the Flyers do need to be aware of. Yeah. And where did this band, I always call him She-Rod of Fire, he was just like a nothing defenseman. No disrespect, he's an NHL defenseman, but we were talking with Alex Appleyard last episode, and he was talking about, he's an NHL defenseman, but Weber is really lifting him. It reminds me of when the Eagles had Terrell Owens, and all of a sudden Todd Pinkston started getting open and acting like he was all big and bad. Maybe it's that kind of phenomenon, I don't know. But yeah, I agree, Dan, that Weber has really looked reminiscent of Pronger. I remember Pronger pushing around, who was it? Zach Parise, and the Devils would bedevil the Flyers year after year after year, and then Pronger gets there in that playoff series when the Flyers were headed toward the Cup run, and he took him out of his element, and we're seeing a lot of the same thing.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but watching Pronger in his prime, and he'd be out there on the ice, and he'd be like like a standing near the crease, and you're just thinking to yourself, this other team's not going to score. No one's getting near the net, and his wingspan is so big that it's just impossible to get around him. And it's like the same thing with Shea Weber. I mean, not quite to that extent. I mean, I really have never seen anyone as dominant as Chris Pronger was in his prime. But it's a similar type of scenario where you see him out on the ice, and it's just like, all right, I guess we're not going to get that many good scoring chances. And then when Montreal's on the power play, hey, we can't let this guy bomb away from the point. So he's a guy that, you know, I'm having fun watching him. Fun's not the right word because I'm a Flyers fan, but it is kind of fun to see a guy like that who's playing so well, who's dealt with kind of a lot of injuries in the past and a lot of questioning, the type of, I don't know, not maybe the will to win, but kind of like his desire to play at his age, considering all the injuries. But he's been an absolute warrior, and Sherratt has been fantastic alongside him. Now, obviously, when you're playing with Shea Weber, you're going to have an advantage out there, like you were just mentioning with Todd Stinkston. But
right. Perfect name, very good.
You know,
I'm proud of you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But it's, you know, it's fun to watch the guy. I mean, if I wasn't a Flyers fan, you'd be watching this series, and it's other than game 2, it's been very nerve-wracking hockey. It's the kind of hockey you want to see. You know what I was thinking today, and I tweeted this out, was like, I could just see this series going something like the Flyers win in like 6 games, and they get outscored, like, you know, 8-5 in the series or something like that, or you know, they get outscored but they win the series, and the Canadiens fans are complaining about that. But feels like that's kind of like the direction we're headed in this series a little bit.
Yeah, well, the Flyers been outscored, what, 6-3 in the series?
So far, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really kind of crazy. But, you know, one of the other defensemen prior to Pronger who kind of had that vibe of someone we were talking about right before we went and started recording was Larry Robinson. Because it was a big deal for him at 6'4", and the guys weren't quite as muscled up and into fitness. These guys were smoking in between periods, like Guy Lafleur, and having a beer, I guess, maybe, I don't know. But he was that kind of guy, too. And he stood up to the Flyers at a time when everybody was afraid of the Flyers, particularly after that Russian game in '76. I remember Dennis Potvin, who was doing color commentary, said, the Flyers are on top of the hockey world right now. And then later that spring, I mean, the Flyers were without Bernie, without Rick McLeish, but not to reminisce too much. But yeah, so we're seeing this line of defensemen. Robinson was probably a little bit better skater than Pronger, but not quite the intimidating force. Yeah, a lot of fun thinking about those days, and the tradition carries on. So, Amy, what do you see going forward here? It looks like this is just going to be a grind to a 6 or 7 game conclusion, or maybe Chef, you know, to the 8 games. The Chef had a typo there. We were doing our predictions, and he said, what was it? I forget what series, but somebody was going to win in 8.
Yeah, that was going to be the Canes over Boston. But all I need is one more overtime, and I'll be correct.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So you turned that right around on me. So yeah.
My big fat thumbs, I hit the 8 instead of 7, and as I'm pressing send, I see it. Who will see that? You know, 500,000 people. Who cares?
Yeah, well, I always call, if you remember back in the day, Eddie Murphy. He had this. He was I don't know, it was buckwheat or whatever, and he would say "Wookin' Panub," and he's got this Wookin' Panub kind of tweet style. But anyway, back to the Flyers. Amy, what other, like, I guess you call it like a motifs have you seen in this series that you think are going to be continuing, or things that the fans want to kind of concentrate on to see, you know, which way they're going depending on who you're rooting for?
First of all, I do think this is going to be a long series. I thought I was a little bit out to lunch when I made my prediction that it would be Flyers in 7 before the series started. But now that we're 3 games in, I think it very, very well could go to 7 games. I think as far as the things to watch out for, I talked about this on our podcast last week as well, is what I'm interested in this series is the number of parallels, and we actually have already talked about one that has happened even since the series has started, which is both teams have now had a very emotionally motivating event happen for both of them. Both teams have exceptional struggles on the power play. So which team is going to figure that out first? Both teams have young players who are stepping up to the task at hand, whether it's Kakinemi and Suzuki on one side, or whether it's Carter Hart and Joel Farabee on the Flyers side. Coupled with both teams are not getting any production out of their big guns. On the Flyers side, I mean, Voracek, okay, finally got his second goal last night, but we haven't seen Giroux. JVR, as you said, has not done enough yet. Konechny's not scoring. Your go-to, your top six, your big guns aren't producing on the Flyer side. For the Habs, Brendan Gallagher, nothing. Philip Deneau, nothing. Max Domi, nothing. Jonathan Drouin, nothing. So it's almost eerie to me how many parallel situations and stories are happening with both of these teams at the complete opposite ends of the seeding spectrum are taking it in this series. And I think it's going to be the team who can find consistency and find the answers to those parallel situations. Which one of those can make those things click first is going to be the one that comes out as the winner.
Yeah. Definitely makes sense. Dan, any observations as we go forward and look forward to what's going to occur the rest of this series?
Well, the lineup decisions are very interesting for Alain Vigneault. And one of the young players that Amy mentioned who's stepped it up is Joel Farabee. Well, he really stepped it up for Game 3 up into the press box to watch the game, which, was certainly a point of contention among some Flyers fans. Because one of the problems is that, I think that one of the reasons that our Stars, power play aside, are not maybe scoring is because of the presence of a guy like Shea Weber. So other guys are going to have to step it up. Well, I saw JVR on a milk carton yesterday. I didn't really see him playing in the game, although he had one good shift.
Right, I remember. Yeah.
But, the problem is that you've got Derek Grant at 3C and Nate Thompson at 4C. Now, these guys they're not offensive players. And it's a problem, quite honestly, because if your first line's not going to be performing, and the second line, which was so great during the round robin, is kind of not been as good, you need to get a little bit of production out of your third and fourth lines. And they've got decent offensive players like JVR, Albert Cubel can pitch in with a goal here or there on those lines, but they're playing with centers who just are not creators of offense. And I almost threw my little Flyers scotch glass at the TV last night when I saw Derek Grant on the power play, and then he gives it away and it turns into a 2-on-1 the other way, shorthanded. Like, I'm so sick of Grant and Thompson in those two spots, but the problem is what are you going to do otherwise? I mean, you could move Claude Giroux or Scott Lawton to center, and then you could be a little deeper down the middle. You could try and insert Morgan Frost in the lineup, but it's very clear from the fact that he has not gotten really any attention and no time during the round robin that he's not going to be an option here unless there are a number of injuries. You could bring Farabee back into the lineup and put Raffle at center. They've done that some, and that's I think it's going to be very hard for them to keep Joel Farabee out of these games because he's one of the Flyers' leading scorers in the playoffs at this point, and he's played in fewer games than the other guys, and they're so lacking in offense right now. The guy scored the game-winning goal in the first game against Montreal. I thought it was a little ridiculous that he was scratched for Game 3, and to the point where I was thinking maybe this guy, he took some big hits in Game 2, maybe he's banged up a little bit. But you've got to get Joel Farabee back in the lineup. And with that, I think maybe you scratch Thompson or Grant. I guess they're not going to scratch him. They've got him at 3C. But I think you've got to get Farabee back in the lineup. And maybe you put Raffle at center or Lawton at center. But I think they've got to do something there, because right now the third and fourth lines for the Flyers are just getting cratered in terms of no offensive opportunities. And that's going to have to change, not only if they're going to beat the Canadiens, but if they beat the Canadiens and move on, you're going to have to get some more offense out of more than just your first and second lines.
Right, yeah. Well, I could definitely see that. I don't know if it was Meltzer or Jason Martinez was talking about how Farabee got ragdolled a little bit, and he might have been manhandled to the point where he's a little sore, and they think, you know what, you get him a rest, and maybe we might see him. And Amy, it is an interesting dynamic now. The Flyers are going to have, I believe, their first back-to-back scenario with games tomorrow at 3 and on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And they're both on NBC Sports Philly, I believe. You might want to double-check your listings. But that's going to create a certain kind of dynamic, and maybe one where Joel Farabee would draw back into the lineup just for that reason alone.
Absolutely. I mean, it's they haven't played a back-to-back, and it's going to be the first time. Granted, I mean, it's been a relatively easy going schedule so far, but the intensity of this series is going to start taking a toll on guys, particularly if they're going to keep playing as physically as they did last night. If that happens again tomorrow, I mean, you saw Aube-Kubel with 2 huge block shots yesterday. If he feels either one of his feet or lower legs today, it's incredible. Yeah. Guys were sacrificing the body a lot last night to protect Carter Hart. To his credit, Carter Hart, yes, has broken the record, and congratulations to him on getting a shutout at such a young age. But the fact of the matter was, he didn't see a whole lot of traffic. The Canadiens' even strength had 3 high danger shots on him in the entire game. That is a credit to the defense in front of him, who were sacrificing everything to keep the Canadiens as far away from the net as they could, and they succeeded in doing that. So I think, guys, this series is going to bang some guys up, and it could open the door for a Farabee, or as Dan even suggests, perhaps a Morgan Frost at some point to come in and try to put their stamp on things.
Yeah, and let's not forget Connor Bunnaman too. He could see some time if this series starts becoming more physical later and things slow down a little bit. Chef, let me just get some of your thoughts before we turn toward some other subject matter at hand.
Well, I tend to agree with Dan a little bit on this, and Amy as well. It's going to come down to the third and fourth lines, I think. In particular, the fourth line. I really think that Grant's got to go as 3C, and you do what you have to do. If Lawton needs to move over, that's what you do. Farabee up, Bunny up. At this point, I think the key to everything is going to be that fourth line that can actually shut down and change the momentum of a game, and then maybe getting your third line out there, and if you can snipe a goal here and there, I mean, that's how. I think that's how this series is going to go. It's going to be hard. It's going to be dragged out. It seems like the top lines are canceling each other out in this series, and I think if you're going to take an edge anywhere down the line, I'm leaning to the way the fourth line has played the last 2 games. I think I lean more that way.
All right. Yeah, I can definitely see that. The Flyers definitely need some more production from some other sources, whether it's going to be coming from some of these players that you're talking about, or whether the power play is going to get going. But the current rate of production is probably not going to yield them a series victory. So we don't want to be too long tonight, but I do want to cover briefly other series around the league. Just in score, Tampa defeats Columbus 2-1 today. Even though it was a nip-and-tuck game, Tampa apparently did a really good job toward the end of the game, shutting down the Columbus Blue Jackets. That's a real dogfight of a series, but now Tampa leads 3-1. I'll just open it up if anybody has any thoughts about it. It looks like Tampa is grinding a lot like the Flyers are going to have to grind. Columbus appears to be going down. I'm sure they won't go down without a fight. Dan, you want to take a crack at that series?
Yeah, I mean, Columbus was so impressive in the first round, showing resiliency that I have not seen any hockey team show in a long time. First they blow they lost the game in, what was it, 5 overtimes, and then they come back and win the next game,
right.
And then they blow a 3-goal lead with like 5 minutes left, and they lose that game in overtime, and that's game 4, and then they come back and win game 5. I mean, though, just extremely impressive. I said coming into the playoffs that the only team that terrified me in terms of a matchup for the Flyers was Tampa, just because I think that once they get rolling, they're the most dangerous team, certainly in the Eastern Conference, and not having Stamkos impacts that. But Hedman was able to play. We thought he might miss some time after the injury he suffered against the Flyers, but he's back. And I think you're right. They're kind of gritting it out a little bit here against Columbus, a very good Columbus team, a very resilient Columbus team. And I'm just happy. This is why it's important the Flyers got the number 1 seed. Because if the Flyers can advance past Montreal, then it looks like in the second round, they'll be taking on the New York Islanders. As opposed to Tampa, who lost that round-robin game against the Flyers and got the 2 seed, they'll be taking on either Boston or Carolina. And I would much rather see Tampa and Boston slug it out for what would be a very rough series. And then the Flyers, if they can get past the Islanders, whatever, take on one of those teams. I just think it's a good thing that the Flyers don't have to take on what looks like Boston or Tampa until the Eastern Conference Finals if they get that far. So I think that's a positive thing. Out West, I mean, these teams are, I mean, I made 2 bets on the Stanley Cup. I bet the Flyers at 10-1, and I bet Vegas, just because I think Vegas is the best team in the league. And they certainly have looked like it so far against Chicago and in the round robin. So to me, seeing the way that Vegas is kind of ragdolling Chicago is not that surprising. And Colorado is doing the same thing. So those teams are very dangerous, the Avs and the Golden Knights. And in the East, I think, Tampa is very dangerous right now.
Yeah. And Amy, the one thing is you got to be careful what you wish for, because, I don't think the Islanders are quite as speedy as the Canadians are. And they certainly don't have that level of goaltending, but their structure might actually even be a little bit better under Barry Trotz with some more veterans. So even though they're up 3-0, and I think Washington looks like Barry Trotz is in their head, but that would be a tough one if for whoever wins this series. Although I guess Tampa would play Montreal then in that scenario. But yeah, the Flyers have traditionally had trouble with the Islanders over the last little bit.
You can't sleep on the Islanders. They have actually got a really dangerous team filled with a lot of guys who can play some very skilled hockey. And I think that I don't want to say that they've surprised a lot of people, but I think that they're making a bigger impact than people expected them to. And I believe that the Islanders are one of those kind of flying under the radar. Everybody thinks, it's just the Islanders. But the Islanders over the past few years have really been stocking the stores with, Aho, Barzal, Brassard, Boychuk. I mean, there's Noah Dobson is a tremendous hockey player. There's just kind of one after the other as you go through their roster of guys who can really make a difference. And they're taking it to every single one of their opponents. Now, yes, if it ends up being a Tampa Bay opponent, either for the Flyers or for Montreal, that's a whole new challenge. I ran a poll before this series started when it was, the Flyers playing Tampa Bay to determine who was going to be the number 1 seed. And I asked Canadiens fans who they would rather face in the first round, Tampa Bay or Philly. And hands down, it was Philly, because Tampa Bay is like kryptonite for Montreal. So that will be a tough series. But even though the Flyers won that game against Tampa Bay, I think an actual playoff series between the two teams would be a bigger challenge than that round robin game was. So I don't know. It's all it's the interesting thing about the playoffs this year is the way with the reseeding after every round, and it's all of these scenarios. You have to have like advanced calculus degrees to figure out who would be the best opponents for whom and who's going to play who, and it's not very straightforward. But I think the next round is going to be filled with a lot of really big slugfest series.
No question. It's like boxing. Styles make fights, and styles a lot of times make series are what they are. But you think of it, Tampa now appears to have a little bit more physicality. It can play a lot of different ways to win, and that's what champions do. They play the game that they have to do. Like tonight, we're going to find out that in the Boston series with Carolina, Tuukka Rask has to opt out for personal reasons, and Boston responds and wins the game, is leading the series, and we'll see if that one-game response with Jaro Halak and net yields the same kind of victory. But Carolina is pretty stacked. That whoever comes out of that series is going to be a real tough out for whoever has to play them. That's for sure. And I agree with Dan. Right now, Vegas looks like the best team, and Colorado is now up 3-0 in their game versus the Coyotes, so they could go up 3-1. Chef, I don't know if had
4-0 now.
Oh, 4-0. See, he's watching that.
Which is the same amount of shots that Arizona has. 4. So it's four shots for Arizona and 4 goals for Vegas or for Colorado.
That's what you call getting rolled. But one of the most intriguing series is the Dallas-Calgary series. Calgary had a lot of momentum going in. Ben Bishop is kind of like not really healthy. The Stars are sleepwalking through their round robin, and it looks like they've woken up. And they're not my favorite for a cup, but they might be able to take this series. Chef, have you had an opportunity to check that out?
Yeah, well, I've been keeping an eye on it because I did say at the beginning of the year that the Flames were going to the Cup. I thought they were a lot better than they were, but so I'm keeping an eye on it. I got to see 2 games, and unfortunately, it was games where the Flames kind of owned them at the beginning there of the series. But to give Stars credit, Pavelski, God, I mean, he had a hat trick. What was it, last night? Yeah, last night.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
He had a hat trick, and he just killed. He was always somebody, because I was a big Sharks fan for years, and my West Coast team, so to speak. I just loved it. I just loved him. I loved Jumbo and all that. So I kind of I've been following it, kind of secretly rooting for him at least to do well, and maybe get a chance to go somewhere. I think the most ironic thing is that if you look at the round robin games, the finals for the top seed, I looked at it and went, oh my God, that's the Eastern Conference Championship and the Western Conference Championship games that we're getting a preview of, and quite possibly could have a preview of if it is going to be this tough grind that we're saying that these series have become. So I'm just looking forward to a lot of good matchups that we've seen so far.
Yeah. Then in the last series, St. Louis is really struggling with Jordan Binnington and net, so they come back with Jake Allen, which surprised some people, but it's that kind of year, and it's that time of year. Amy, are the Blues going to be able to come back in that one, or is the Vancouver young talent kicking in at a time where they're ready to start hitting their stride?
I'm actually very interested to see how that series ends up. Jordan Binnington, I actually covered Jordan Binnington when he was playing for the AHL for the Providence Bruins 2 years ago. And he was an AHL All-Star that year and was pretty incredible at the AHL level. And it was kind of like he was kind of a lot of people were kind of sleeping on him as a goaltending prospect. And then look at what he ends up doing once he finally makes his scratch in the NHL. Now he's suddenly struggling here in the playoffs this year. And I thought it was a really bold move to bring Jake Allen in, who not to mince words, Jake Allen has not been good. So you're telling, you're telling the team you've got to play well in front of this guy if we have a hope of getting back into this. So does Binnington get to come back in? I don't know. I can't imagine. And Binnington, as they always say, goalies are a little weird. And Binnington is definitely one of those cerebral goaltenders. And so I'm not sure how such a disappointing performance so far in the playoffs and now being replaced by Jake Allen, I don't know how he'll respond to that. I would hope that he'd be able to kind of push through that and get his head back in the game and be able to bounce back. It's the one that I don't really know how it's going to go. I think the Blues could come back from this, but in fact, I have my prediction before the series started was that St. Louis would take it in 7. So I do think it's going to run the stretch. I think they could come back, but the key is getting the goaltending under control.
Yeah. It's Chief Craig Berube, he is not bashful. If he thinks they're up against it and they're going to respond, which they did, it's always intriguing with him. He's not afraid to step on anybody's toes. But so I guess, folks, that kind of brings us to where we're at right now. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that the Game 4 is tomorrow at 3 p.m., Wednesday at 8 p.m., Friday if there is a Game 6 necessary, and, of course, Sunday at a time and to be determined would be Game 7, the deciding game. And with that, Amy, I just wanted to thank you for coming on again and get maybe if you have a final word and of course let's get your contact information so people can catch up with you on Twitter and check out that podcast you did with Danny Briere and so forth.
Well, I have to say thank you again for inviting me back. It's always so much fun to talk to you guys. You've all got such great perspectives on the game, and always an entertaining conversation. And really enjoy it and enjoy your podcast overall. So thanks for having me back again. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. Tomorrow is a big game in this series. Going into Wednesday, it's a tale of two different series, whether it's the Canadians facing elimination or if we're back to square one, tied even at 2 apiece. So tomorrow is a really crucial game in the series, and I don't know that I love that it's a matinee game and an afternoon game. The Flyers don't always play so well in the afternoon, but we'll keep the fingers crossed that they're able to pull this one out. As far as where to find us, you can find me on Twitter at FlyersRule is my personal Twitter account. But I would invite folks. We actually have a completely Flyers dedicated Twitter account for Rocket Sports Media now, and that is at the Flyers Report. Again, that's at the Flyers Report, and that's just kind of a sister account from the AHL Report. So you'll get I do all of my live game coverage at the Flyers Report on Twitter, as well as the post-game media coverage with the coaches and players, and on off days as well. And yeah, our podcast is called The Press Zone. It comes out every week, usually on a Tuesday. We did it on Monday this week since there's a game tomorrow. And yes, as I mentioned, Danny Briere joined us today to chat a little. He played for both teams, so it was interesting to get his insight on playing for both organizations and what he has seen unfold so far in this series. So for sure, be sure to check that out.
Fantastic. Thanks again for joining us, and maybe if the Flyers are around long enough, we'll get you back on. Let's cross our fingers on that one.
Crossing the fingers and the toes. That'd be great.
Terrific. Thanks again. So, Dan, let me get your final thoughts, and as we head into game 3 and 4 back-to-back, and probably be back next week with analysis of that, and maybe we might have to come back a little earlier because this thing's just getting truncated to the point where it, might have to do a weekend show. I don't know, but yeah, your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually just sort of, I was just thinking about it was sinking in that the next time that we do a show potentially could be like a season, wrap up for the Flyers. I mean, the way that this thing happens, they're going to be playing a game on Tuesday, a game on Wednesday, and potentially a game on Friday. So this is post-COVID hockey, the return to play, and these teams are playing fast and furious. I think that, I'm hoping that we're going to get to see the Flyers who showed up for most of Game 1 and all of Game 3 instead of the Flyers that showed up or didn't show up, as the case may be, for Game 2. So there's a lot going on with this team in terms of trying to see, hey, which veterans are going to pick it up and which rookies are going to contribute. And, we obviously hope that they can keep it going this season and make a real deep cup run. If they don't, there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to kind of pop up. But for now, I think they're going to come out the next 2 games, and I think they'll play their butt off. Here's one thing to keep in mind. With no days to recover after Game 4, Game 4 is even that much more pivotal. Because let's say the Game 4 goes to overtime, and whoever loses is definitely going to be at a motivational disadvantage, an emotional disadvantage, with only one night of rest before the next game. So the back-to-back introduces a new element, and let's just hope the Flyers can pull out Game 4.
Yeah, definitely. I remember back in the Pittsburgh series, what was that, 18, that one game where they had the injury and they needed Val Filppula to play. And for one game, it was fun. But you knew the Flyers were going to lose that game. And then, of course, that disastrous Game 6. So it's, big game tomorrow, like both Dan and Amy said. Chef?
I say this. How pumped would, the Flyer fandom be if Giroux came out and did something on the first 5 minutes of this game where he delivers they dominate a shift. I'm not even saying have to score. They just dominate a shift and hopefully score within the first, 10 minutes of the first period. That would be huge. That would be big. I think that would be the game determination, the first 10 minutes of the game tomorrow, whether we go up 3-1 or whether we're tied 2-2. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be very entertaining, edge of the seat hockey, a grinder, as they say, and it'll be good. It'll be good, solid entertainment, baby.
Absolutely. And people can find you on Twitter at
Chef to the Left B.
Terrific. Check them out. And Dan, you're at DSilver88 on Twitter. Is that the?
That's correct. The 88 for Eric Lindros.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, if you want to yell at me, my name's Isaiah, and I'm at Isaiah ISAIAH _. Don't forget the underscore 520 at Isaiah _520. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. I just want to say thank you before we go. We were at pre-pandemic listening levels, and we really do appreciate your listenership. We're going to hopefully have some fan involvement shows going forward like we had last year with the Flyer Fan Fest. Definitely want to plan to do that at a time when the Flyers aren't so busy. And with that, we got a couple games coming up. We'll have a show when we think it's the best time to give you the most amount of information. Until then, everybody, take care.